The three of us have come together tonight because Mike's case is the quintessential case as to what's wrong with the American criminal justice system. I think we're all in agreement that in a free society, the first requisite is order. That's what the three of us are here to do, is maintain order. But we maintain order in a free society based upon the public's cooperation and trust that we're going to do our jobs within a constitutional context. Let me say, Hillary Clinton's on record as saying it takes a village to raise a child. Well, my question then is, what happens when that village criminalizes and incarcerates its young? I submit to you that's what we're doing. That's not viable. A criminal justice system that is not applied indiscriminately and impartially is a monster. My 35 years as a police officer, what I've seen is that we manufacture the criminal element on many occasions. And I really have to tell you, I don't care who I upset with these words. I can prove these words. See, I'm the experiential element, as is Stan and Mike in this conversation. We've got 100 years of policing. We've come to a place where we're tired of seeing black, brown, poor white victimized so we can generate those numbers. Because I've come to a place where I see policing as largely the manufacture of perception for public consumption. People will believe what they prefer to be true, and the American public wants to believe that, again, we are pristine. Let me tell you, 99% of the men and women doing the job do it well. They really try to do it well. But when they know that coming forward will cost them their job, like it's cost Mike Hackbarth his job, they don't come forward. And that imperils all of us, because the community knows who the road cops are. They begin to hate that officer. And then we, who are trying to do our job properly within the constitutional context, we pay the price. We become the victims. So when we speak about Black Lives Matter and other people who are clamoring for change, and quite frankly, there's no justification to hurt an officer, but there's great hatred and anger and frustration today in America. And so for someone to come forward and say the policing function is pristine and we need to do it like we used to do it 20 and 30 years ago, you know what I would have to say to that person? You're either a fool or a bigot. Because the way we used to do the policing function has incarcerated multitudes of black and brown Americans and poor white Americans. Again, this conversation is an imperative. We're either going to reform the policing function, and to that extent, let me say this. I want to go on record as saying this. Dallas, Texas, you need to cease criminalizing young black and brown kids. You got all these programs in place to play basketball with them on Friday night, and then you put them in jail over the weekend, or put their mom and dad in jail for a joint. We need to cease criminalizing for 2 grams or less immediately. Our cultural fabric will not endure much more of what we're doing to it. And keep in mind, all I'm saying is what Michael Botticelli, the drug czar, has said. He's on record as saying the drug war from its inception has brought great carnage in our culture. One need only look at the inner cities of America. One need only look at the statistics for those incarcerated. They are perverse. And I'm going to tell you something. We've monetized the criminal justice system. There are people in this country making great sums of money because you have Americans incarcerated. Incarceration ought to be a last resort. It should not be some type of just, nonsense punishment. It should be a last resort for those who are a real danger to our culture.
But just like that's what this is all encompassing right here, is just government reform and how we can infuse that with social justice.
I'm going to allow, it's a privilege to let Stan Mason speak to that. I've heard him speak to that live on Saturday mornings. Very eloquent, very compelling. So with that, Stan.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Nick. I don't know about the elegant part. I'm just going to keep it real. To me, we have to look at the whole situation. just straight up. Okay, you take the drug wars. You know, most of us started or worked before the drug wars in the 90s when crack hit. And U.S. government declared a war on drugs. That war was fought in the inner cities, and people were just massive mandatory sentencing. Let's lock everybody up. It doesn't matter. We were locking up poor people for one rock of crack cocaine for 5, 10, 15 years, and we were letting people sniff pure cocaine because they had hyphenated names, and they were getting probation or a ticket. Okay, so you've got a generation that grew up watching that injustice. Okay, now we look at some of the decisions and the things that we see go down today, and this is going to say why young people are fed up and frustrated. Okay, now today we have the methamphetamine epidemic. It's sweeping through the suburbs. But see, no one's calling for a war on drugs now because the methamphetamine predominantly is inundating the white community. So now it's a health crisis. And see, and that's typical of America. When it's in the inner cities, it's a war on drugs, but when it goes into the suburbs, it's a health crisis. So right there, we have a disparity in how we're even attacking the problem. Okay, and then you take that.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, we have to look at drugs are about what? Money. People are making money. In inner cities, when cities decline and you get whole blocks that just fall into chaos and decay, these buildings become abandoned. What happens to the property value? It goes down. Then what can you do? You can go in and buy this property cheap. Then you can put in whatever, you rezone it, you put in whatever businesses you want, then the people who used to live there can't even afford to visit because you've rezoned it, you've revitalized it, and you can pat yourself on the back and say, look, we've revitalized a segment of our community, but you've displaced a vast proportionate amount of people into an area they can't afford to sustain a living in. And at the same time, the same amount of policing now that you can drop back there to protect that investment that you just put there. If you'd have put community policing in place in the first place, you could have stopped the decline of that neighborhood and not had people constantly having to move. And, you know, it's looking at the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm not really